So today we try to learn about basic computer hardware and software devices. Okay, so this would help you in few of the competitive exams to clear. So it may you may get a questions regarding the computer hardware and software devices. With this session, you are able to answer those questions related to hardware and software devices. Okay, so let's walk through to these computer hardware devices. So when we are talking about the hardware and software devices, in the hardware devices again we have divided into subcategories like input devices and output devices. Okay, so if these are the few input devices like keyboard, mouse, scanner. These are such input devices. So when you say input, so we are giving some instructions to the computer, right? So we are talking about the computer hardware devices. So we are giving some instructions to the computer, nothing but we are giving some input to the computer. Okay, we are giving some commands to the computer. So in order to give those commands or in order to give those input to the computer, we need some devices. We use some devices. With the help of that, we put some input or we put some commands or we put some instructions to the computer so that it process. Okay, so that it process. So input is nothing but you are giving the command to the computer. Now what are the devices you use to do such activity? What are the devices you use to give the instructions or to give the input to the computer? So we'll talk about those devices. So these are the few devices you can see: scanner, keyboard, mouse, or if you say biometric is also one of the input devices, right? So all these devices which is used to give some instructions or some command to the system or some command to the computer, those are called input devices. Okay, those are called inputs. And even digital camera also is an input device, right? Even digital camera also is input device. So these are the input devices. In real time, say suppose if you want to purchase something, right? If you want to purchase something, so there might be various ways. You may purchase by giving cash. You may purchase by giving some giving some goods, and in return you can get some goods. So these are the inputs. You are giving some inputs to get something, right? So this is the input is about. So these are the devices we use to give the input to the computer. Okay. And similarly, output devices, right? So when you give input to the computer, it does some process, it does some activity, it does some calculation. Okay, it does some process based on your input, right? So after processing it, it will give some output to you. Okay, it will give some output to you where you can see the output of that particular thing, right? Output of that particular thing. Now, output is nothing but when you are giving some input to the computer, it will process it and it will present you. Okay, it will display for you or it will give for you. So for that also we have some devices which will present the output for you guys, right? So those are nothing but one of this is printer, monitor, even speakers is also an output devices. Okay, say suppose you give the input to the computer, hey computer, I want to print this page, right? Then you will say print. When you say print, it will go to the printer and it will give you an output as a one hard copy of print, right? Similarly, you will ask the computer play this movie. Okay, so you are giving the computer key, you are giving the computer to play some movie or to play some audio, right? So in the monitor it will display the particular particular movie or the particular audio you want to play, right? Of course, audio it will display in the speaker, right? So you are giving the input to the computer, it's doing some background, it's doing some process, and it displaying the output devices like the scanner, monitor, or speaker, what kind of depends on the input which you are giving, right? So accordingly, the computer will display. I mean, the computer will pass to the output devices. So these are the output devices. If you give a printer, if you want to print something, the computer will pass to the printer, which is the output device. If you give some input stating display of some image, right? If you want to display some image, then computer will pass to the monitor, it will display some image to the monitor. Or if you want to play some audio, so then it will display to the speaker as an output device, right. So the output devices are which after processing what you will get final product, or what you will get final output through some devices, that is all called output devices, right. Then comes to central processing unit, that is called as CPU. That come to central processing unit. So we said input, we said output, right. We talked about input and of course the devices, and we talked about output, what is output and what are the devices, right. So using the input devices, you will pass the command to the computer, right, and doing some process. I said it will do some internal some process, it will go through some process, and it will do some, if there is something called as printer. So for printing it, so it will identify the printer, which printer to give the print, or if you say speaker, it will identify the speaker, which speaker to display, which speaker to give the output. So accordingly, the between the input and output, there is something is cooking, right. There is something is processing, right. There is something is calculating, or there is something is doing some action. So that is called as an central processing unit. Okay, that is called as central processing unit. In short, we will say CPU. Okay, so CPU, and it is the brain of the computer. It is the brain of the computer, right. It is the brain of the computer, because it is doing all such requests, all such the request you place, or the command you place to the computer. It is doing all such process, right. And it is also called as microprocessor. It is also called as microprocessor. Okay, so it execute each and every instructions you given by the user using those input devices. Okay, usually measured in gigahertz, right. Usually measured in gigahertz. So few of the microprocessor, like Pentium, Celeron, Mac, AMD, Citrix, and Intel is one of the microprocessors. So these are the few microprocessor. So the job of the CPU is to process the instruction of the user, right. To process the instruction of the user. If user want to say, suppose if user want to calculate some say, suppose simply we can say a plus b. Okay, when you say a plus b, you will give a value, b value, then it does the arithmetic logic, and it would calculate a plus b and give the output of that, right. Okay, so the figure, the picture you see, that is called as a processor. Okay, the above you can see the fan, right. So below the fan you have something called as processor, which is it's a chip, it's a silicon chip, simply it's silicon chip, right. So there is a process. So there is a processor, that is called as central processing unit. Okay, where your all inputs will be processed, and not only that processing, it will give the output to the appropriate devices. Okay, if you say print, then CPU do some process and give the appropriate devices would be the printer, right. It won't give some it won't give to the speaker, right. It won't give the speaker, because you ask for print, then it has to print, right. So that would be that all decisions, or that all management or all navigation would be happened, or would be taken decision in the central processing unit. Okay, that is called as the brain of the computer. That is why we call as the brain of the computer, because this is the area where it will think, this is the area where it will decide. If I want to print, give to the printer, output device would be the printer. If I want to play some audio, give to the output device as a speaker, right. If you want to display something on monitor, yeah, it gives the output device to a monitor, right. So those are the, this is a central processing unit, where each and every instruction of the user, each and every command of the user, each and every order of the user would be processed. Okay, so these are the central processing unit. It takes the input from the input devices, process it, it gives to the output devices, right. The result, the end result will display in the output device, right. So yeah, this is what the central processing unit. So as I said, central processing unit is a silicon chip, is a silicon chip. It's also called a macroprocessor. it's very small chip, very small chip, each integrated with enabled with the silicon, right? Integrated this circuit is enabled with the silicon computer made of many chips on a circuit board. Okay, generally it's a you can call it as an all the chips integrated and it makes together is a set of microprocessor, right? So millions of transmissions would be integrated, millions of transmissions would be integrated, small pieces of silicon conditional material, right, conduct material, right. So if you see, this is the exact picture of the microprocessor. So this is how it looks, right. When you open the box, we call it a CPU box, central processor CPU box. When you open the CPU box, there would be some piece of this pointed chip, which is called as a microprocessor. The figure you can see, this is how it looks. Okay, this is how it looks. So this is a device. This is a device, and of course, this is a hardware device which do all these such activities, right? Which do all processing activities, commands given by the user, right? So this is a hardware device, right? One more hardware device is data storage device, right? So there would be some situation. I mean, so in a CPU or in a computer, you will put some data. You'll store some files. You'll store some videos. You'll store some softwares. Okay. You'll store some data, some images, some software, something, right? So the things which is stored in a computer is called as a data storage device, right? Again, data storage devices are various. Data storage devices are various. Some are permanent storage. I mean to say, read only memory, read write storage device. Sometimes you can secondary storage, primary storage. Okay, when you say secondary storage, would be the device which you store, and primary storage would be device the data which is used for the computer. Okay, some data which is used for the computer, that is the primary storage device, and secondary storage device, some devices which is you use. I mean, you delete the data, you copy paste the data, you do all data management kind of stuff, right? So those are called data storage device. Ideally in one statement I can say the data which you use to store, okay, the data which you use to store is called as data storage device, where you store all your data. When I say data, it might be files, it might be images, it might be videos, it might be softwares, any data it might, right? Any data which you store in some area, that is called as data storage device, and this is a hardware component, right? This is a hardware component. Okay, going forward. So again, I said disk read only memory, right? Read only memory. So again, when you say data storage device, we have something called as read write and read only. When you say read only, so you can only read the data, right? The data is stored, so now you can just read the data. You cannot write. When I say write, you cannot edit the data. You cannot edit the data. You don't have permission, or you don't have access, or you don't have or the device itself might not allow you to edit the data. Okay, so just you can read only the data. So it approximately 600 to 700 megabytes of storage it may occupy, right? So these are the few data storage devices. When I say the devices which we use to store the data, those are called data storage devices. So few of them are floppy disk. So nowadays you can't see the floppy disks. Initially we used to have the floppy disks. Okay, and this floppy disk will very minimal data can be stored. Very less data can be stored. So it might be 1.44 MBs of data can be stored in the floppy disk, right? In very initial stages, we used floppy disk. Okay, we used floppy disk, which is magnetic storage device, where you can store very limited data in it, right? So later on we come into flash drives, like we call it as pen drives, right? we come into flash drives. So when we it is an electronic storage device. It is an electronic storage device. Just you need to plug in. Just you need to plug in, and you can play. Right? You can plug in and you can use it. So these flash drives store huge number of data, huge amount of data. You can say it's in GBs. Okay. These floppy drives stores large amount of data. Okay, large amount of data. Whereas in this floppy disk, you need to insert the floppy disk in the floppy drive. You would having some slot called floppy drive, right? So in that floppy drive, you need to insert the floppy disk. Okay, you need to insert the floppy disk. If the computer don't have floppy drive, then you can't use this device. So that is a limitation for this. The limitation of the floppy disk, you can't insert your floppy drive without without the floppy disk without the floppy drive. And the limitation is you can store only very less amount of data. You can't store huge amount of data, right? So this is the limitation for this floppy disk. Whereas in flash drive, you can store huge amount of data, and just it's a plug-in. Just there's a slot where you can insert your pen drive, and you can access the data, or you can copy the data, or you can paste the data. So you can do anything. Okay. So when come to flash drive, so you can store huge amount of data, and this is also an hardware component. Okay. So this is the data storage device. Now, when I say so has like floppy disks, has like pen drives, or flash drives. Similarly, we have something called as computer memories, right? So we have computer memories, the memory inside the computer. Okay, the memory inside the computer. So these are stored in zeros and ones, or on or off, right? On or off. So the data inside the computer is stored in a binary format. Okay, is stored in a binary format. Like if you say the measurement 1 KB, 1 KB could be 1000 bytes, 1 MB would be 1000 kilobytes, or 1 million byte. 1 GB is 1000 megabytes, or 1 billion byte, right? So in the computer, the data is stored in zeros and ones. Okay, zeros and ones, and that is called as binary digits, right? That is called as binary digits, right? So it's a computer memory actually. It's a computer memory. In the computer memory, the data was stored in zeros and ones. Okay, which you cannot see actually, Okay, so it is internally managed. So you cannot see this internally managed. Data is stored in zeros and ones. That is a binary digit. So you can see the calculation. I mean, you can see the measurement, how it measured. It measured in kilobytes, it's measured in megabytes, it's measured in KB. Nowadays, we have something called as terabyte as well. So about that, right? So this is how it looks in a computer. Again, we have in computer memory. Again, we have RAM, ROM. Okay, random access memory, read-only memory. Okay, read-only memory. Right. In the computer memory, again we have something called as random access memory, like RAM. The terminology RAM, which you use to store the data, is processing. Say what happens is really end-to-end process of doing some input, right? So when you give some input to the computer, it goes to the CPU. But inside CPU, to process that input, there should be some memory, right? To process that input, the command, the input, the instruction, the command, to do such process. So inside the computer, there should be some memory to hold that instructions, right? Okay, to hold that instructions, there should be some memory, some temporary memory to process those instructions, or to hold and to process those instructions. That is called as RAM. Okay, so that instructions would be placed in the RAM process, in the RAM memory. From the RAM memory, the computer will start processing on it. Okay, computer will start processing on it. So the speed of the computer is also depends on the RAM, right? The speed of the computer depends on the RAM. Suppose you are passing huge commands. suppose you are passing huge commands or huge commands. When I say huge commands, which take lot of memory, okay, the commands which take lot of memory, and you have very little memory, very 2 GB RAM. You can measure it, the RAM is measured in 1 GB, 2 GB. So nowadays minimum they are using the 2 GB of RAMs, right? So when you are processing, when you are giving in a computer a instruction which may consumes the large data, or multiple or simultaneously you are processing multiple things. Okay, simultaneously you are giving multiple tasks to the computer. Okay, that is called multitasking. We'll look forward what is that exactly multitasking is about, right? So sometimes you will give instructions, back to back instructions to the computer, or sometimes you'll open one video, you'll start browsing to net, or you do some copy paste kind of stuff. So parallelly you are doing all these activities. Okay, parallelly you are doing all these activities. So these all instructions would be stored in the computer memory called RAM. Okay, from RAM CPU will pick, some RAM processor will pick, from RAM a processor will pick that pick that command, each and every instruction, and start processing it, right? So when you are giving more instructions and RAM size is less, then your the performance of the computer will be reduced. Okay, the performance of the computer will be reduced. Okay, so one point here, the performance of the computer is depends on the the microprocessor, the microprocessor, okay, and the RAM, right? The performance of the computer is depend on the microprocessor and the RAM. Okay, so RAM is used to store the instructions you are given to the computer, and the microprocessor to process those instructions, right? So it stores the instructions in the RAM. Okay, so microprocessor will pull that instructions from the RAM and do some processing, right? So these are the things. So yeah, so RAM is nothing but read only memory, which the each and every instructions would be stored in that RAM. Okay, the data that is to be processed. This when the computer is this will be we can say this is as a logical memory. When I say logical memory, until unless the computer is on, the memory in the RAM will be exist, or until unless the processor the command is on, or I can say until unless the command is on, the memory will be there. Once the command is closed, or once the system is off, the memory will be lost. Okay, so this is a logical memory. So then and there it will create some memory for that particular instructions. We can also say it as a dynamic memory. Dynamic memory, when I say dynamic, it will create then and there when some instructions comes in. Okay, it will create some memory when some instructions comes in. Okay, so that is about RAM. So that is dynamic memory. We can say dynamic memory. Okay, we can say dynamic memory. Okay, then something called as, we have something called as ROM, right? So when you start your computer, something will load, right? Some Windows will load, right? Some OS will be loading, and the software inside the software installed in the computer will be loading, right? So all kind of stuff which when you kick on the computer, or when you start the computer, the prerequisite or the initial loading, the very initial loading, like OS will be loading, the supporting files will be loading, or the files which are installed would be occupied some memory, right? It will be loading. So all this stuff when you start the computer, whatever the things will be loaded, that would be loaded from the ROM. Okay, that would be loaded from the ROM when you operate the computer, right? When you operate a computer. So so cache memory increases the process by recording and anticipating instructions, right? So all the things will be loaded. So there would be something called as cache memory. When I say cache memory, the memory this is also a temporary memory, right? Temporary memory, where if the same instructions, say suppose I want to print one, or I can say suppose I want to calculate something, I want to do some process calculation of something. So it holds some memory, right? it do some memory and do some calculation, right. Same instructions, again I am giving the same instruction, then it won't go for the it won't go for the RAM or ROM, something like that. It pulls from the cache, that is bridge or shortcut or temporary location or temporary area, where repeatedly you are giving same, if you are repeatedly you are giving same instructions to the computer, instead of processing, instead of doing all that stuff, it will get from the cache. Okay, it gets from the cache. So what happens here is instead of again processing everything, once it gets from the cache, it means that you are reducing the processing time. When I say reducing the process time, you are increasing the speed of the computer. So speed of the computer would be increased because of these caches. Okay, it's a temporary, again this is a memory, it's a very temporary memory, where repeated instructions, when you place a repeated instructions to the computer, so those instructions or those result would be comes from the cache, right. So yeah, so RAM, dynamic memory. When I say RAM, dynamic memory, so ROM is a static memory, right. It's a static memory. This memory is allocated for certain instructions. This memory is fixed for certain instructions. So this is a dynamic memory. So it is always occupied something, right. It is always occupied something, and it will be operated when you start your computer very fast. When you start your computer very first time, right, when you on your computer very first time, so this RAM memory would be activated, right. So this is a static memory. So if you want to understand the terminology of dynamic and static, dynamic means it will create at that point of time. Okay, it will create at that point of time. It will create at that point of time, at that given instance of time. Then that is called a dynamic. That is RAM. Static, fixed. Okay, so this is how it is. A is equal to 10. That's it. That is fixed. Okay, so this memory is fixed for certain instructions, and this is used for those instructions. That is called as RAM. That is called as a ROM, right? Yeah. So again, cache. Cache memory, when you are repeatedly giving some instructions to the computer, instead of processing it, instead of doing all that stuff, it will get from the cache. Because again you are asking the same thing to the computer, right? Why again, if you ask same to the computer, why again to processor and all kind of stuff, instead of that it will get from the cache. Okay, and one point is, even even each and every device has some memory. Like say suppose using keyboard you will type something. Okay, using keyboard you will type something, right? Using keyboard you will type something. So when you press A, that A command will store in some memory, right? That is also cache memory. So in the keyboard also you have some memory to store some the digits. If you press A, so in the keyboard you have some memory which stores that A. If you press B, in the keyboard you have some memory which stores B. So that is also called as cache memory. That's very temporary memory. So this temporary memory, again it exists till your system is on, till the process is exist. Okay. So these are about the computer memories, right? So far the things we discussed is all about the hardware stuff. So all memories or devices, input output devices, CPUs, computer processing unit, microprocessor, RAM, the device you saw, right? RAM. So all these stuffs are related to hardware devices. Okay, all these stuffs are related to hardware. Now coming to the software. Software is something you cannot see, right? So hardware. So far we saw hardware device. Yeah, scanner you can see, printer you can see, mouse you can see, right? RAM you can see, but software device as such you cannot see. It would be done logically, right? You cannot see that stuff. Okay, so in the software device, in the softwares, we have something called as graphical user interface, right? When you switch on your computer, you will display with one screen. You will display with one screen, and the screen you will be having multiple icons, right? So that is called a desktop. So has like to interact with the computer, we have hardware devices, we have hardware components or hardware devices. Similarly, to interact with the computer, we have software things also. Software devices also, I can't say devices, but yeah, softwares. I can say softwares. Those are devices because those are can see, can feel, can touch, right? But these are things just you can interact, just you can you can click, you can place one click, then it will execute, right? So to interact with the computer, graphical user interface is this is the interface which is used to interact with the computer, okay, which is used to interact with the computer. So it is a desktop, whatever you can see on the desktop, when you switch on your computer, the screen which will display, right, that is called a desktop, that is called as graphical user interface. So whatever you see on the desktop, is called as icons, right, is called as icons, okay. It's called as icons. So it's a small picture that represents files, commands, windows, okay. GUI, operating system, Unix. So when I say operating system, that might be a Unix operating system or Windows operating system. So there are again the kind of operating system. So we don't get into the operating system concept because again it is again something different stuff. So just the agenda is to, what is this GUI? Graphical user interface, GUI you can call it as. So the interface, the interface using which we can instruct, or we can browse the computer, or we can give the commands to the computer, right? So this the screen you are seeing is a desktop, so in the desktop, whatever you can see, that is called as icons, okay. Those are